All right. I know many of you were here yesterday, so thank you very much for coming back. For those of you who came back and for those of you who just came today, well, we would like to welcome you. And I know you'll find this very, very interesting. I'm going to do a quick, really quick introduction. And I hope I wrote this all down right. But no, Rob Collins, great friend and a political strategist. You have the benefit of very knowledgeable and experienced people here. Rob worked for the NRSC, so ran U.S. Senate races, and then an action committee, American Action Network, which ran really House races, funded as House races, and now has his own business, S3. Steve, I'm sure many of you have talked to and know Steve McMahon. Steve has worked on for a number of U.S. senators, very high-profile senators, I might add. And in addition to that, worked on various campaigns as a strategist, a commentator, just an all-rounded guy, and is co-founder of Purple Strategies. Michael, benefit here with Michael Steele of a guy who can actually say not only did he run races, he ran himself and he won. So he's got all very, very broad experience and perspectives. But Michael was head of the RNC, was lieutenant governor of the state of Maryland, and is now an MSNBC reporter. Very happy to have you, Michael. And Pat, well, Pat, are you grading these people, Pat? Or are you?
Yes,
Pat
keeping
Egan
track,
is
yeah.
professor extraordinaire at NYU. And when I always have a question, especially with voter attitudes and politics, Pat's the person I call. So with that, I am going to now get into some of, kind of lay some groundwork for you guys and get these guys an opportunity to really tell you about the institutions that we've all worked in, that we've run, and that we continue to watch. So in looking at the results of the 2024 election, today really what we're going to discuss is the future, what the future might hold for candidates, campaigns, political parties, and the growing billion-dollar business of campaign. When I started out in campaigns, it was the $100,000 campaigns. Now it's billions. With a decrease in political party participation that we're seeing, an increase in social media advertising, the use of advanced technology and voter targeting, and virtually unlimited money, the way we pick candidates, how we campaign, and what campaigns are spending money on has significantly changed. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen political parties, I believe, virtually sidelined. Political parties have become less effective and weakened with the 2002 Bipartisan Campaign Finance Reform Act, affectionately known as McCain-Feingold, that limited contributions to individuals that would go to political parties and campaigns. Then you start putting on top of that the 2010 Citizens United ruling, which allowed corporations, wealthy individuals to spend and raise money, unlimited and somewhat unrestricted money, on running ads on behalf of on behalf of specific candidates and parties. Additionally, and again, this is a little bit of my editorial. Maurice talked about this ad here, but I think that I have seen, and we'll talk about this as we go on, a shift in how candidates are selected. You know, traditionally, political candidates came up through the party organization. I was a campaign worker. You were a worker, or you volunteered. You then would perhaps move into a local office, run for office, a local office, then move up to a state office and maybe a federal office. I think recently more and more candidates running have no political experience, and their involvement with state, local, and national parties is really non-existent. And this has both positive and negative, which we'll talk a little bit about. So let's get started with our favorite topic, money. And for those of you who might have seen the play Cabaret or the movie, you might remember the iconic song, "Money Makes the World Go Round." Well, guess what? It's true in campaigns too. Money makes campaigns go round. Doesn't always ensure you a victory, but it sure does help. So I'm going to set the stage here and give you some numbers of what's been spent in the 2024 campaign as we get ready for some questions. These will be rapid response questions. I'm going to call on folks and really try to keep it to a couple of minutes. That way we can get more questions from myself and then from you all. So I'm going to time everybody. Okay, you scared? Okay. I told you I'd try, Lynn. All right. So this is all from Open Secrets, and the numbers I'm about to give you, just keep in mind that the filing doesn't end until the end of the year. So numbers are going to keep coming in, but the numbers are extraordinary, I think. My first congressional campaign that I ran was one of the most expensive in the country in 1988, and it was $850,000. Now I don't even think that's a week's salary for people. All right. Open Secrets projects that 2024 federal election cycle is on track to be the costliest ever. Okay, no surprise there. It will cost over $18 billion in spending. And, yes, I'm sorry. That's for the whole, all spending. So in 2020, to give you some perspective, it was 15 billion. So we've gone up already 3 billion, and God knows by the time this is all tallied up. Total outside groups, super PACs, are projected to have spent $5 billion. Now, okay, 5 billion, okay, but that's 30% of all the total money raised and spent. 30% came from special interest and super PACs. And to put things further in perspective, July through September alone, and I know you've probably read this and you've seen this, the Harris campaign, the Democratic Party, in those 3 months raised $1 billion. And the Trump campaign and the Republican Party raised $430 million. That's just giving you a little bit of a snapshot of what we are now seeing. I'll spend a couple seconds here telling you now, where does the money come from? 600 million, or 7% of all the money raised, was from 10 individuals, donors to outside groups and super PACs. 16% of all money raised was from 100 individuals to outside groups and super PACs. This is the one that kind of floored me. And I did a fair amount of fundraising in my roles, various roles over the years. 50% of all money raised, 50% of all money raised was from 1% of the top donors from both parties. In contrast, only 16% of all the money raised came from donors giving $200 or less. So we see what's going up, we see what's coming down. And I'm going to start off. Since 2016, campaign spending has tripled, with the 2024 federal elections obviously most expensive at $18 billion. As campaign operatives and consultants, I'm going to ask you, what do you attribute this significant increase in spending? I'm going to limit you guys to, I'll start with you, Rob, go down the row, but just a couple seconds, and then I'm going to dig a little deeper.
Couple seconds. Well, you got to put it in perspective. So Americans spend $800 million a year on pet costumes at Halloween. We spend $2 billion a month on chocolate. So, it is a big country. So spending that 18 billion, really what you've seen is the failed attempt to get money out of politics had the reverse impact. 2008, Barack Obama gets out of public financing of campaigns, and the spending on races has been geometric ever since. But I can assure you, for the Democrats in the audience, one of the many structural problems the Democratic Party has, the money is not the issue. They have plenty of it, and they're going to keep having plenty of it.
And just one thing is, Rob just said, so Barack Obama was the first president that did not take public financing. George W. Bush was the last presidential candidate to take public financing. Or John, oh, I'm sorry, you're right, John McCain. Did I forget about him? Oh, man. I'm not a big fan of campaign finance reform. Sorry, Steve.
No, I mean, I think Rob's right. The corrosive part of this is not the amount of money spent. It's where the money's coming from and what people expect to get back in return. Elon Musk spent $120 million and took over X and made it basically a megaphone for the Trump campaign. And now he's going to be running the Office of Government Efficiency, a new department that isn't funded, but perhaps it will be. Maybe the Republicans are going to come to town and expand the size of the federal government. Right, Rob? But it's.
Do I have to sit between you guys?
But the corrosive part of this is that these people and these entities are not just spending the money for good government or for better policy that will help everybody in the country. They're spending the money to get policies that will benefit them directly, and there's some evidence that it works.
So I had the companion bill matter before the Supreme Court against Citizens United to repeal the impact of McCain-Feingold. McCain-Feingold was campaign finance reform, which took money out of the hands of the one institutions where there was absolute accountability up and down the board, and that's the national parties. because our national parties have to report their donors every 30 days. And they have to tell you who they are, where they work, where the money comes from. If you don't want your money to be on my books, you're not going to write that check because you don't want that exposure. So Citizens United and campaign finance reform and McCain-Feingold is at the heart of this. The Supreme Court, unfortunately, dismissed my case because we established it before the Supreme Court under my tenure at the RNC and took up McCain-Feingold, and the rest is what they say, what we see now. I think money is property, so you get to do with your money whatever you want. If I want to give my money to you as a Democrat, I will. If I don't want to be on your books, I won't. If I want to give my money to you as a Republican, I will. If I don't want to be on your books, I won't. And what's the difference? Exposure, accountability. The reform right now needs to be an absolute exposure, sunlight across the board. I don't care how much money you put in. Look, I raised the most money when I ran for the U.S. Senate against Ben Cardin in 2006. I raised more money in a Democratic state than the Democrat and lost the race, right? So this idea that somehow more money in the race determines the outcome, who has the money, what they do with the money, you still got to run the race. You still got to run the campaign. You layer on top the level of exposure that money, where that money comes from, that may address some of the initial concerns people have. But I don't see this corollary between, oh, all this money and all the bad stuff. You run a bad campaign because you're a bad candidate, no matter how much money you have, that's not your problem. And if you run a good campaign, the same thing. Is there some level of corruption potentially? Yes, because we don't know who the donors are. We don't know who these people, how these dark money sources are. So let's put some light on it.
Not a practitioner, so don't take my word as strongly as theirs. But I'll tell you what political scientists think about this, which is we're very skeptical about money having much impact on races. So we're right there with you, Michael. There is a sense that it's bad when you don't know who's giving money to who, because then the accountability piece is diminished. And the other piece of this right now, two other things. One is that small donors tend to be more ideologically extreme than big donors. So either on the left or on the right, these are the folks who are donating to AOC or to Marjorie Taylor Greene, right? So these are the small donors like the ideologically extreme candidates. And the fourth thing is there's diminishing marginal returns to money. So probably half of the money that was spent in this most recent election was a complete waste, had no impact on any vote whatsoever. So it's from political science standpoint, there's a lot of skepticism about the attention paid to money by both advocates and campaigns.
Thank you. I'm going to dig a little bit here, but a political consultant recently told me, and I'm going to pick on two of you to answer this question, that given, this is particularly with U.S. Senate races, but they're starting to see it in U.S. House races. So given what the campaign raises themselves to run, that is, they're being outraised by what super PACs are contributing to the campaigns and in their name with no coordination with the actual campaign. And I guess the question becomes is, at what point is it insignificant who the candidate is and more significant as to who the super PAC is and what their interest is if they're starting to spend more money than the actual campaign and putting up ads and working for the campaign under the auspices of no coordination? Are we losing control of our campaigns? And is this thing really spun out of control? Pat, I'm looking at you.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know I was being called on.
No, I'm looking at you because
yeah, sure.
I know you've done a fair amount of analysis on some of the money, and it just that I was not shocking, but I guess I wasn't expecting it, especially when they said that while the Senate races are doing this, now it's dipping into some of the House races.
Yeah, and actually, I think where it probably has the biggest potential impact are the primaries for the House races. So AIPAC, which is the American Israeli Political Action Committee, I think that's the term. Anyway, very pro-Israel PAC that plays heavily in Democratic primaries. They've come into a number of primaries this year and really spent a lot of money on the more pro-Israel candidate. So on one hand, yes, they're playing big and some coordination, but not a whole lot of coordination between the candidates they're backing and these initiatives. But at the same time, they didn't all work. So there's some candidates who, the voters are still like, no, we're going to vote for this person, even though you've spent 5, 6, 10 to 1 against this candidate. So again, this kind of comes back to this question, which is, it may be that if a candidate has enough money in today's media environment, and especially this splintered media environment where you can't buy a whole bunch of points on one network and know that you're going to hit everybody, that no amount of money is going to really sway the race very much one way or the other. And so again, yes, I think that's right, that to a certain extent, the campaigns are getting a little bit out of candidates' control. Whether that has an impact on the ultimate result is another question.
And Rob, I'll turn to you because I think, with your experience for both the NRSC Senatorial Committee, National Republican Senatorial Committee, and with American Action Network, which was House, I think what we're seeing, and this is both Republicans and Democrats, I'm going to be the nonpartisan moderator here, but we're seeing both on Republican and Democrat side, particularly with leadership PACs. I mean, whether it's McConnell and Schumer or the House guys, they're raising such significant money and they're going into these races that they also are spending significant amounts of money. Is there a difference between perhaps what, special interest super PACs are doing and maybe what leadership PACs are doing and contributing to push these folks over or not push them over?
Well, there's leadership PAC is a hard dollar. I think what you're saying is
Yes.
super PACs control,
Super PACs, yeah.
not legally, but in essence by leadership. They're the same thing. No, I mean, the only time campaigns are losing control because the law has evolved. I mean, you saw it with DeSantis campaign. He ran out of money on the hard dollar side.
Right.
So that's the campaign side. And then so the super PAC came in and basically functioned as the campaign. We saw that in the Ohio primary in 2022. The only time you really see a candidate lose control is, the biggest spender promoting Trump in the 2022 primaries was the Democratic Party. And what they were doing, and you saw it in like New Jersey, Josh Gottheimer goes in with $250,000 and said, there are 2 Republicans in the race. And this one loves Trump and he's too crazy for Northern New Jersey. And guess what? This guy wins the primary. And he was the weaker of the candidate. And then the Democrat has an easy walk into re-election in that district. So, I mean, that's where there's like a perverse problem. But if it's a supportive PAC, the coordination laws have been so blown open by the courts and I mean, there's billions of dollars going through this thing and everyone's trying to get their screwdriver in there to loosen it up. And now it's like, I mean, compared to where it started in 2010, like when I ran the Tim Scott super PAC when he ran for president, and we were pretty plain vanilla what we were doing, but we were watching what DeSantis was doing and even Haley and some of the coordination stuff. I was blown away that they were getting away with it. But there's been no complaints and here we go. So,
Does anybody here want to run for political office?
it's, no, but like I said, it's only when you have a pernicious campaign that's actually working against you is where you can lose control of the message. And, so I think that should be tightened up. I mean, there's some FTC protections. Right. But like Coke can't hire RC Cola to attack Pepsi, but that's what you're seeing in politics. And, I don't think it's good for the system, but it's what's happening.
Well, and Rob, thank you. You touched on an interesting point too, where we started seeing where maybe the opposite party is getting involved in the primary of the opposite party and perhaps trying to handpick who the opponent will be for. So we're just trying to really point out, because we could spend all day on this, but just really trying to point out a variety of different things that are out there happening and maybe why they're happening and maybe why they shouldn't happen or why they do happen. So I hope we're not going too fast or confusing you, because we're really throwing a lot at you, but money is become a big, big part of campaigns. And the last question I'll have, and I'll maybe look to Steve and maybe Michael just to touch it real quick, is did this money, and you kind of touched on it, Pat kind of touched on this, did this money really get us anything? I mean, if it was less money spent, would the outcome have been any different?
Does it get us anything, or does it get?
I'm sorry, I'm putting myself in the us. I'm not supposed to be an us.
Well, no, but I mean, so I mean,
make a difference. All this money was spent, did it make a difference in these campaigns?
I'm not sure it makes a huge difference in the campaigns. In fact, I don't think it does. But where it makes a difference is kind of along the margin. So for instance, if there's a big corporate interest and Mitch McConnell comes up and says, hey, I need you to put $50 million in this super PAC so we could run these Senate races. The big corporate interest is really, frankly, less interested in the outcome of the Senate races, although they are interested in the outcome of the Senate races. They generally want Republicans to win. But they're much more interested in having Mitch McConnell know that they provided $50 million of cash for these campaigns that are important to Mitch McConnell. So that next year and the year after, when they need something in the Senate, they can go to Mitch McConnell and say, hey, you remember when you needed 50 million? We ponied up. It's time for you to pony up for us. And that's kind of, unfortunately, in my view, how this works. That's the insidious side of it. So, they're giving the money because they have the money, 50 million bucks to a big industry, and you can pick any category you want. They'll provide the 50 million as long as Mitch asks for it. And then they'll expect something in return down the road. And generally, they get it. They don't get things that are dramatic change, but in a category, and just pick your category, just affecting things on the margin of legislative policy can be big dollars in terms of the outcome, enterprise value for a company or for an industry. The difference between, for instance, in the pharmaceutical industry, price controls and no price controls, or in the oil and gas industry between cracking down harder or less hard on fossil fuel extraction. So those are the kinds of things that are in play. And those are the kinds of things that animate a lot of these conversations and decisions and the big money that comes in. And Michael's right, by the way. If all of these players had to put their name on things, it would look a lot different. Now, I think it would probably flow still.
The same.
It would look different.
I agree with that. The real bottom line here in terms of the winners and losers and who's up, who's down are not the candidates. The candidates are ultimately the losers at the end of the day, even when they win, because they have submitted themselves to a process that requires them to go out and seek money from super PACs. And even though there's no coordination, that doesn't happen. And from the party structure, the Chuck Schumers and the Mitch McConnells and the leaderships, the NRCC, the DCCC, for example, and certainly from donors. You know who the winner is? The consultants, the people who place the ads, the people who, manage the money, because they're pulling percentages off of all of it. And what's going to be interesting for me to watch is as we move more into a digital space where I don't need to place hard money ads on TV because no one's watching. And why am I going to spend $17 million to run, 10 points or whatever the friggin' amount is on, late night TV when I can be on your phone 24 hours a day for a fraction of the cost? That's the future of campaign finance. And we saw that in this cycle, which was, I think, a very important turning point in the money spend, because as Maria noted, there was only $400 million spent by the Republican National Committee. And a lot of that went into 220-some thousand, poll watchers and other things. Very little of it into ground game. It went into digital. They didn't have to spend as much money. They had a very effective, good digital program that put them on Joe Rogan's program, that put them on a lot of podcasts and places they otherwise wouldn't have played before. They weren't on late night TV ads. Yeah, they may have, maybe, Saturday afternoon football game here or there. But there's a potential change in the game coming. It'll be interesting to see how the digital space opens up and changes how campaigns spend their money and how much they actually will need to spend going forward.
Thanks, Michael. We're going to hit a little bit on that a little at our next topic, but just a real quick question with regards to, every year we hear about campaign finance reform, and there's always a pro-campaign finance reform, a group advocating that Congress and the states require unlimited political spending by non-candidates, and it needs to be independent. There needs to be a greater transparency of, as you've pointed out, who's contributing, who's paying for those ads. The FEC needs to be much more forceful, and there's always a little bit of a cry still out there for public financing. Just quick, yes, no? Do any of you believe that we foresee in the near future campaign finance reform happening? I'll start with you, Pat. Yes or no?
Yes, but on the local and state level. So that's where all of this change is happening, including my home city of New York City, where there is public financing. There's different kinds of reforms in place. Not sure that I agree with them or think they're a good idea, but
Right.
that is where this is all happening.
Yes, I think at the state and local level, and I think states like Virginia are more and more of a model which have unlimited campaign finance, but there's full automatic disclosure within 24 hours. So
I agree with these guys. I think there'll be campaign finance reform around the edges, but it's good if it's at the state and local level, it's not going to impact what we're talking about now, which is presidential, Senate, and congressional campaigns that make policy for the whole country. And so I think Virginia is a great example. Give as much as you want, report it within 24 hours. But I don't think there's really much, if any, chance that that will be enacted at the federal level.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. I do want to just say one thing, and I'm curious for just Pat's real quick. I mean, in the last 30 years, 94% of all Senate races, the top spender won the race. So I guess when you said like the money doesn't matter, I mean, I think it's the most determinative thing out there. And Trump is a freak that he's been outspent 3 presidential races in a row, and he won 2 out of 3 of them, arguably. No, I'm kidding.
There we go.
But my point is that, you know, usually, you know, Obama outspent McCain, Obama outspent Romney. I mean, if you look at the history of federal elections, W outspent Kerry. You know, actually, if there's one thing you really can count on is that if you can look back and see who spent more, you generally have your winner. Hillary put together $2.5 billion. She should have won that race. And I think Trump ended up at like 600 million. It was massively outspent. You know, I don't know what the total spend. I mean, I know Harris did the $1 billion. I don't know what happened to Biden's money. Where did that? I never heard where that went. But anyway, she threw, you know, the Democratic Party threw $1.5 billion in like 100. Yeah, I mean, so like in 100 days, they threw $1.5 billion. And I actually think if you look at the spending, it does work because if you look at the liberal base, it was abortion all summer, and then it was democracy as the top issue. And then what I think really hurt the Democrats right at the end, it became economy. You saw a shift about October 16th. You saw the polling. And the Republicans were always economy, immigration, and they had, you know, a third issue that kind of bounced around. And the moderates tracked the Democratic Party until about October 1st. You saw that all of a sudden you saw the economy move up. But my point is, and we saw this in 2020 or 2022, where it was Trump's midterms, 18, that the Democrats put all their money on healthcare. All the races started talking about healthcare, and they ended up spending about 70% of their money on healthcare. And the Republicans were all over the place. So if you look at, I think the biggest category the Republicans spent federally was about 18% on, I think it was taxes. I can't remember, it was in 2018, a long time ago. But my point is, actually, money can really drive that race. And if Kamala didn't have the $1 billion, I think she gets blown out because she was really able to dominate the conversation in media, paid media, to keep her core issues of abortion rights and democracy really top of the ballot for a long time. But then, like I said, right at the end, you saw, I think, a pretty seismic shift that everyone just said, we need, the economy is the issue. So I know I asked a question, then went on for like 10 minutes, but so
Michael, do you want to answer?
I'm legitimately fascinated. I was curious about that.
I hear what you're saying. I'm not saying in absolute terms that money doesn't matter. Of course it does. I mean, what campaign doesn't want to have more money than their opponent, right? You want to do that. But I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily set the outcome of your race, because you still have to run your race. You still have to organize on the ground. You still have to have a message to give people. They have to buy that message, not literally buy it. They have to buy that message, invest their vote in that message. So I think we are all at the same place at this table on the impact of campaign and reforms and financing reforms and things like that. In that, yes, money is a feature of our politics. It is not dispositive of where our politics will go, because we can all point to races in which the most money lost or the most money won. And at the core of that is the kind of campaign is running. You just gave a perfect illustration of that having $1 billion plus and having to shift your message in the last quarter of the race was, I would argue, a mismanagement of that money, because if you put that money in messaging early on what the country tells you is important to them, then you've changed the dynamic in the course of your race. So there are a lot of ways in which money can influence your outcome, but it's not going to be dispositive of what that outcome will ultimately be, because you still got to do all these other things.
But I will be a political science geek and join Pat on one thing here for a minute, just for a minute. The most reliable predictor of an election outcome is still past partisan performance. That's why we have red states that go Republican and blue states that go Democrat. Now, this year it was a little different because you had Democrats that outran Kamala Harris in Senate races, 3 or 4 of them. But there were a number of Democrats who were swamped by the fact that they were blue senators running for re-election or not running for re-election in the case of Manchin,
Right.
in red states that everybody knew Trump was going to win. And I don't think there's any amount of money that would have saved John Tester.
Right.
I don't think there's any amount of money that would have saved Sherrod Brown. I mean, it's $354 million, I think, was spent in Ohio. You know, there's not any amount of money. Bob Casey didn't lose because he didn't have enough money. He lost because Donald Trump won Pennsylvania. So money makes a big difference on the margin. Partisan performance, I think, historically is the most reliable predictor, and an exceptional candidate. I mean, Barack Obama won in places in 2008 that you wouldn't have expected a Democrat to win, particularly a black guy named Barack running for president after being in the Senate for only 2 years. He was an exceptional candidate, but those are kind of pretty few and far between, really.
So I'm going to move on to the next topic. But, you know, just maybe 2 takeaways, you know, keep hope alive. Money helps, but it's not a sure thing. And I think we'll find probably Donald Trump was outspent in his last 3 campaigns. So you don't have to be the most necessarily the richest. There is still candidates that don't have as much money as their opponents that win. Maybe not the best example. And then Kamala Harris, I think one of the things that I was really very excited about being a former fundraiser in one of my lives is that she was able to generate so much enthusiasm, so much energy, so much passion that we saw on her campaign an increase in small dollar donors. So I think that small dollar donors can be increased, but it really is going to be more subjected to on who the candidate is. So just, I don't want you kids going away, your students going away thinking, what am I doing as a political science major? No. So there are two things to look forward to. Now, this is a subject kind of near and dear to my heart, as well as probably Michael's, because most of my career was working for one of the national parties. And I've been around for a long time and I've seen a lot, fought a lot of battles that I didn't win. But, you know, have political parties been forever weakened? And, you know, building on kind of the money, which, as I said, that could be a topic, and Lynn and I talked about this, that could have been a topic that we talked about for the whole 75 minutes. But what is the future of political parties? So George Washington, in his farewell address, warned against the dangers of political parties. He felt that there were going to be bitter disagreements between factions. It was going to encourage corruption, and it was going to invite foreign influence. Now, does any of that sound familiar? And although many people agreed that there shouldn't be political parties, 2 years after he left office, political parties were formed. So that says a lot. But I'm going to fast forward 230 years, and this April, Project Democracy published a very interesting article. Why do we need political parties? And they concluded that democracy is unthinkable without political parties. They highlighted that attempts to weaken parties often backfire, either by failing outright and creating shadow entities, and they're less transparent than political parties. So, you know, keep that in mind. It's a very interesting 25-page article, and I think it highlighted a lot of good things. I'm going to jump into political parties. I'm going to kind of set the stage here a little bit too, and give you just a real quick, 30,000 foot. The National Party in particular, both on the Republican and Democrat side, and then the state and locals, which feed into it, their real function is, or has been, putting together the party platform, the issues, the policies, the goals of the party. They hold conventions, certainly on the national level, the nominating convention for president and vice president. State also does a fair amount of nominating candidates. They recruit candidates at all levels, fundraise to help campaigns with their campaign, the candidates with their campaigns. And this is a big thing for me. They've also in the past provided the tools that perhaps one candidate couldn't afford, but collectively the tools that they could send out to particularly state and local candidates that could be used, whether it was technology, communications, voter ID and turnout programs, grassroots organizations. So that's just a quick 30,000 foot of what the national parties and then the state parties did on a lesser level. And my question is, and I'm going to direct this to Steve and to Pat, based on what we maybe all grew up in with what the parties have been doing as they start shifting away, do you think the Democrat Party will look different now after the Harris and Biden campaign?
Sadly, no. I don't think it will. And autopsy is probably not the right word, but I think the Democratic Party needs to just step back and say, what has happened to our base and how did we lose it? And do we want to go get it back? And what do we need to do if we want to do that? And those are hard questions. And
we've asked them many times ourselves.
At some level, I'm not sure, the odd thing about this year, it's a little bit like 2005 in a sense, because normally, or in many cases, you would have either a president or a majority leader or a speaker who were members of your party that are effectively the leadership. So I think Chuck Schumer thinks he's the leader of the Democratic Party right now. Maybe Nancy Pelosi really is. I mean, Hakeem Jeffries, but there's going to be a DNC chairman that's going to be elected in January, just like Howard Dean was back in the day. And the Democrats don't control anything. So that chairman is going to have an awful lot of leeway to do things that are normally harder to do when you're chairman, because you have a president saying, no, you're not going to do that, or a Senate majority leader or a speaker saying, no, we're not going to do that. The next DNC chairman or chairwoman is going to have the ability to really kind of do some things that haven't been possible for a party chairman for quite a long time. I hope they take advantage of that. I'm not sure they will. I think national parties have gotten weakened to the point that they're not as powerful or influential as they once were. They can still affect things around the margin. I think state parties and local parties are actually where the power lies and where the value is in a party organizing structure. So I'm not down on the Democrats as a national party ideologically as much as I am operationally. They've got to do some work, and I just hope it gets done.
No, I think it's an excellent point. I think sometimes defeat has its benefits, not many, but it allows a chairman to come in and I think do things differently because they lost, and maybe try some new things that people are reluctant to do.
There's going to be a big fight in the Democratic Party between, the progressive wing, which says we didn't do as well as we should have done because we didn't turn out the progressives and we didn't talk to the progressives and we didn't appeal to the progressives. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of people like me who say, in my view, at least, it's more likely. I think the data suggests that we were doing a pretty good job talking to progressives, but we weren't doing as good a job talking to the Democrats who voted for Trump this year, who had previously voted for Biden and Obama and Clinton. And those are the people that we need to get back to win elections again.
Yeah, I would say, political scientist Julia Azari coined this great phrase, which is we live in an era of strong partisanship and weak parties. And so that means that most Americans, 90% of the public, are pretty much hardwired to vote Democrat or Republican and adopt the policy positions of the parties forthwith. At the same time, the parties themselves as organizations are weakened in the ways that we've all kind of acknowledged in terms of things like anointing candidates to be nominated for their party line, keeping their caucus in line when it comes to voting, particularly in the House of Representatives. And what's interesting, I think, is that in a sense, the Republicans have had more of a problem with those things over the last 5-10 years than the Democrats. Neither party has been doing great. But if you look at, say, Nancy Pelosi's ability to rein in her left wing compared to, say, Mike Johnson or how many speakers of the House have the Republicans had over the last cycle to rein in their right wing. Interestingly enough, and this is probably a historical anomaly, the Democrats have been a little bit better at keeping their left wing in check compared to the Republicans and their right wing. And people may think that's good or bad, depending on where you are on the political spectrum. But it is an interesting thing also in terms of, and Rob alluded to this earlier, getting the more moderate candidate nominated in a congressional district. The Democrats, as you mentioned, have played in these districts and kind of played to the extreme Republican voters who like these extreme Republican candidates who end up not being very well suited for the general election. Ask Kari Lake, for example. So there is this interesting tension right now. And I think the progressive moderate fight will go on in the Democratic Party, but I don't think it's actually going to be as fierce as it's going to continue to be in the Republican Party.
Points. I'm going to jump quickly to the other side of the aisle. In the 2024 campaign, the Trump organization essentially took over the Republican National Committee, and really for the sole purpose of electing Donald Trump president. And they provided little support for the down ballot candidates. Is this trend, and this is to Michael and Rob, do you see this trend as continuing, or will it self-correct in the coming year with the need to help and assist our down ballot state and local candidates? I don't need to put you on the spot or anything as a former chairman.
Look, the idea of a political party is one of its organizing principle. And its organizing principle is around the foundational ideals of the party from its establishment to the current moment, with the obvious changes, with the ebb and flow of events and time. It is organized around principles and policies that it conveys. And one of the things I learned very early on as a county chairman for 6 years, a state party chairman and national chairman, is that elections are not necessarily won just top down. They are won bottom up. In fact, I can recount a number of races in the 2010 cycle in which our gubernatorial candidates won because of the state legislative races that we won in their state. Wisconsin comes to mind, where we flipped the legislature that helped the gubernatorial candidate as well. So you have a purpose for how the party positions itself. That requires the leadership of the party to be focused not just on the top presidential level or the gubernatorial candidate, but the county executives, the mayors, the state legislators, the dog catchers, those candidates that draw voters to your party and that help you align and realign the voting base of your party. That was one of the things we witnessed with the Democrats this year. Their realignment went haywire. They lost a lot of folks who are tethered together by those ideals and those principles and those values, and they no longer saw themselves reflected in that. Republicans, I think, are living in a mirrored environment that is not actually reflecting what's going on for them down ballot. Why do I say that? Because you look at what happened in the House. This red wave in 2 cycles now did not produce the massive numbers of congressional candidates that they thought they should. And the reality of it is you've got to look at it holistically, and I'm afraid that's not the game here for the party. When its orientation is around a principled player, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to be chairman if John McCain had won in 2008, because I don't play well with others. And I wanted
well with us.
I do, but I'm not in charge of anything here. So, so I'm just one of many in service to the cause. But the reality of it is when you are the chairman of the party, you have to bring a vision and a sense of purpose that then is translated up and down the line. And that's hard to do when you have someone at the top directing every move and every effort that you're making, because that person doesn't know what's happening in Prince George's County, Maryland. But I do as the national chairman. And I've got to be able to address what's happening in that county if I want to win in that county. And so for me, it's much more holistic for the party at this point, how it intends to hold this sort of tenuous coalition, which I don't think is much of a coalition at this point, because you need more than one cycle to really cement that in, because you can lose it in 2 years. Let's see what that is. If the party is able to really use its authority to work with county and state party apparatus and leaders to cement in those gains, then you begin to turn a corner. But we'll see. I'm really curious as to how that's going to work. I'm not, given how it's played out up in the last cycle and the last time and throughout, I'm not very hopeful of that. I think the party is going to have some real internal struggles because there are a lot of Republicans like myself who have issues with the direction, the focus, and philosophy of the party. And those things do matter.
Rob, anything to add?
I mean, presidents famously gut the political parties. Usually, Bush was famous. I mean, Obama's DNC was almost non-existent, if you recall. Congresswoman Wasserman Schultz was, I mean, famously mocked by the White House for her role. So, I mean, I would equate American political parties in a similar way. I'm sure I'm not going to get it all right, but like Oxford, where like every, this house and this, these houses roughly look for the greater glory of Oxford. They're all kind of independent and they all kind of move. So you have two corporations called Democratic Party, Republican Party. They're both spend between $3 to $4 billion a year. They have no HR department. They have no long-term planning. They have like nothing a corporation should have.
I don't know. When Michael and I were there, I think we had.
And then the divisions underneath it, I mean, for candidate training or recruitment, the divisions underneath it don't feel like they report to the big mothership. So they're all acting independently. It's not similar to how I've picked up in my time here at Oxford, how these kind of all operate. So it's like a loose confederation of groups, but they're never going to go anywhere because, if you want to get on the ballot, you need the Republican Party, you need the Democratic Party. And the only time these corporations, by the way, ever get along is when a third party emerges and is a real threat. Then they will get together and destroy that. Yeah, that's why you'll never see like Ross Perot or Tom Steyer. You'll never see a credible Mike Bloomberg. You'll never see a credible independent presidential candidate because it just, you can't get on the ballot. And so they're always, and some are going to rise. Howard Dean came in and said, we're going to invest in all 50 states. Obama comes in, guts the DNC. Same thing. You're going to see a strong chairman at the Republican Party, and they're going to, Haley Barbour had 4 years. He was remarkable. Did you work for Haley?
No, I worked under him.
But, he.
I worked on the second floor on the NRCC.
Oh, you were at the end.
He told us what to do also.
Yeah. And he was seen as like the classic Republican chairman. And then, Michael Steele comes in. Classic Republican chairman, but in between there was, I can't remember who, but that's right. I mean, these things ebb and flow, and but they're structurally very important, and they're going to outlive me. So that's just the nature of it.
Well, I hope you're right. And just a quick follow-up question. In 2024, Elon Musk, America PAC, developed, organized, funded, targeted state-specific Get Out the Vote program. It is a function traditionally done by the national committees. I think that probably the Democrats did a good job this year, maybe not quite good enough, but their grassroots effort. And the Republicans really had no grassroots effort except what Musk had put out. And I guess the question I have, and again, being full disclosure, this was a big project of mine when I was at the committees to make sure we had that grassroots organization with the tools to become more and more sophisticated with IDing and getting votes out. This outsourcing of key functions. And again, this is just a real quick question. I mean, is this a good direction that we're going in for the Republican or the Democrat, where we're taking something and saying, you're going to pay for this and you're going to do that? Because then the institution doesn't exist. It gets lost with whoever really initiated that program. In addition to the fact, is it very targeted to, you'll get it, but you won't? So these outsourcing of key functions of the committees, and it's for the Republican and the Democrat. Any quick answers on that?
My quick answer is
It's got to be quick.
it will be. If I'm the chairman, I want to control it. Period. I'm not outsourcing jack. It is all, I'm going to have my finger on every dollar and every button. We raised $192 million in 18 months in 2010, and I knew exactly where every dollar went on the ground in every state. We funded states that had never received money before, like the state of Illinois, never received money from the RNC. Then maybe from the NRCC, the NRSC, but never from the National Party. We made sure, and in fact, adopted Howard Dean's 50-state strategy for the first time for Republicans. We played in every state. Wasn't just about those hand-picked states. So I want to control where my money is going, and I want to
So
control.
you're a no on
I'm a
outsourcing.
no. I want to control my ground game.
Democrats, I mean, I know this didn't happen this time, but is that something that you,
I'm with Michael.
Okay.
And so is Howard Dean. It's like, we're going to raise this money. We're going to deploy it. We want to build parties because
From the ground up.
because we're going to live on after the presidential campaign is over. And we have to have something to do that.
Yeah, I would just add real quick that it's already happened. The parties are going to get out the vote. It's just too hard. It's too hard, too expensive to raise the money. Hard dollars are a pain. They're hard to raise. The Democrats have always had a backbone of union, get out the
Workers.
vote. The Republicans finally figured out this ballot harvesting thing, and but between what Elon did, what Charlie Kirk did at Turning Points USA, the Sentinel programs that Senator Haggerty got behind, and then party building stuff, it was the most sophisticated operation we've ever seen. And you saw it in the early voting numbers. We beat the Democrats in Nevada. That's never, at least in my lifetime, I can't think of a time that we didn't beat, you guys ended up at like 30,000 plus votes on election day, which is shockingly low. Philadelphia did not come out for the Democratic Party, but we were able to rally basically the T and banked a ton of votes before election day. And it's happened, and that's the
you see it
innovation.
continuing?
The party, they just can't raise money as quickly and as efficiently as super PACs can. That's just the nature. So until we
That goes
put
back to our first part of the
well, we got to,
conversation.
Right.
I would love the Virginia system, which is no foreign money and 100% disclosure on unlimited
All
contributions.
right, with that, I am going to go to the audience. No, it's a great dialogue. And again, we jammed a lot in here, so I apologize ahead of time, but hopefully it gives you a lot of food for thought. So how about some questions from the audience? Tom is going to swing around with Mike and just tell us your name and where you're from.
I'm Harrison Lewis. I'm from Atlanta, Georgia, and an MBA student here. Thank you all for your time. Rob, you touched a bit on a third-party candidate and why maybe that wouldn't happen. Maybe you could expand upon it, but I'd pose it to the whole group. It seemed like this was the year, if ever, for a third-party candidate, especially when it was Trump versus Biden. So what happened with the no labels movement? Why weren't they able to get someone like a Nikki Haley or a Joe Manchin to run as a third-party candidate?
Yeah, by the way, Georgia and Trump just do not like each other.
Right.
That was the one state when I was doing my own make your own electoral college, I was like, this polling there is oddly similar to the last election. I was like, that was the one race, that was the one state I got wrong. I thought it'd go to Harris. Because it's a fool's errand, no one's going to stake their career on a losing effort. People do that. You see like the Libertarian or the Constitution, fringe candidates will stake their reputation to run for president, I guess, to make a point. But if you're really trying to win, so if America, think roughly a third, independent, Democrat, Republican. Well, and we saw this, was it the Roosevelt race? Teddy Roosevelt runs as a third-party candidate. He was president, he loses. It's just too hard. And then also ballot access every state is different.
Yeah.
Some states are super easy, you write a check and you're on. And then other states, you have to get 3,000 people from each congressional district and they have to sign, and you have to get 5,000 in case 2,000 get, it's like crazy, really expensive too. And then, like I said, the Democrat and the Republican Party may not like each other, and we may try to get the Libertarian kicked off the ballot, and we try to get the Communist put on the ballot just to try to bleed off of 1 or 2%. RFK, I think, got 500,000 votes on election day because he was still in enough ballot, and that theoretically hurt Trump. I don't know if it did, but that was the theory. But we'll get together and say this wealthy guy is running, and that's not good for any of us, and we'll just make it harder. So when Steve turns in his signatures, my Republican lawyers go through, and then they do the same. But when the independent guy turns in his signatures, all of our lawyers, and so we're booting people left and right. And so then there's a structural, and it's just really hard. And so that's why you've seen people flirt with it. And some people, I think Ross Perot got 17%. I think he was the highest
He did.
ever. And I know people have studied it who have unlimited wealth and for politics, and you could put $1 billion into it, and your best case scenario is to throw it to the House of Representatives. And if anyone who's watched Veep, you know how the process goes. But it's really, I can't say it's impossible, but it is structurally really hard.
So this is my sweet spot.
Uh-oh.
I agree 1,000% with Rob on this because we've been doing this ass backwards. You're not going to win a third party race at the presidential level. You're just not, because of that infrastructure problem. But you know where you will? When you run for mayor, when you run for the city council. And so I've argued for 20 years or more that the country wants more than one party. They want a third party, that every poll verifies that. They want to shake up the choices. That's why you have ranked choice voting, final five voting, and I work in the national popular vote space. So there's a lot of movement among voters to do something different with the system. That's one. Two, the ground game is where you have to work to change the way voters vote. I'm not going to get you to change the way you vote by asking you to vote for president, because you're too invested in that office, right? From a political partisan perspective, where you're less partisan and more critical in your thinking and assessment of candidates is the guy or the gal who's going to be your mayor or your county executive or your state rep or your senator. And so my argument is, in order to change the game for third party advancement in this country, you do it from the bottom up. And I have a case in point in this election to prove it. So independent veterans, I work with my man, Mr. Rykoff, who is part of organizing this, elected 4 independent candidates at the state level this cycle in difficult places, and in South Dakota, and in a red area of California, Nebraska. So the idea is, if you want to change the game, you got to change the way voters play the game. And in order to get them to change the way they play the game, you change the way they vote. And the way you do that is to put up candidates that they want to make an investment in. And if you get them to do that with an independent candidate, and they get to be able to change their behavior with respect to how they look at candidates, then you begin to open this thing up a little bit further downstream, potentially. You're absolutely right. It's not happening in this cycle, next cycle, any other cycle, unless you really begin. If you're starting here,
it could happen.
yeah, in your generation,
I'm going to move us along.
I was going to say, just real quick, your generation is the one where this change is beginning, but it's going to come from the bottom up. It's not coming top down for president.
All right. Sorry, Michael.
No, it's
but if
fine.
you want to talk afterwards, please do. We're going to try to get a couple more questions in here. Any hands? My man.
Thank you, Maria. You already asked all the good questions.
Never the case.
Maurice, I'm doing a DPhil here in politics. Just in light of the Senate leader race today, I was just wondering to what extent, and you mentioned the leadership PACs, now fundraising has become kind of the key ability to stay in power and ensure that the party is cohesive.
So the question is, how does politics and fundraising influence leadership races? It's largely irrelevant in one sense of the word, which is, and I won't pick on the Democrats, but there's always a theory, this current leader is a tremendous fundraiser and he can't be replaced until the next one comes in and raises more money. And then, so we saw that with John Boehner, Speaker of the House, raised a bunch of money. Cannot be replaced. Paul Ryan comes in, raises more money. He cannot be replaced. So the members count that as a part of the job, but it's not determinative, at least on the Republican side. It helps to be able to do that. And I think if someone had no experience at all doing it, they'd be tough to run. But usually at that level, if you're running for speaker or leader of the Senate, you have some chops there. So it really does become more policy, what does my time here look like if this person is my leader?
Who's gonna win?
Soon.
So, yeah.
Okay, you heard it here from the same guy who predicted Tim Scott would be the nominee last year. No, but that was because he sort of had to.
I was only running a super
Okay.
PAC.
Any more questions from the audience? Oh,
Oh, that is a good
Oh, I
one.
can go first.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
Those super creepy ads, but I don't even want to describe them. They were way too creepy. And then the ones that were like, vote against your husband. It was like the weirdest ads. I mean, those are the strangest things I've
I
ever
saw
seen.
that one.
It was like in the voting booth, you don't have to do what he says. And I was like, what?
Nobody has to know
And then
it.
there's the guy watching porn, and it was just weird stuff. I was like, I can't believe this. It must have focus grouped in some way.
This panel's getting a little too colorful. Do we have any more questions?
So I don't have a question, but I always find this really helpful to understand
Okay, then
how,
we're done. No.
how much $1 billion is, right? So a million seconds is 11 days. 1 billion seconds is 31.5 years. So that's a lot of money when you're talking about billions and billions of dollars going into these races.
Good government's not cheap.
All right. One last question? Yes.
Hi, everyone. I introduced myself yesterday, but I'm Elena. I'm doing my DPhil in politics here. I'm a Rhodes Scholar. I kind of just want to bring up something you touched on very quickly, which was this tension in the Democratic Party in their autopsy, whatever you want to call it, between do you go progressive or do you go moderate? And I'd love to sort of hear all of your perspectives on how you think that is going to play out and who is going to be the winners and the losers in this Democratic autopsy.
That's the best time to do it.
That's the big question that nobody really knows the answer to. I mean, I could tell you what I think about how we can win the elections that we want to win. I mean, just right now, our coalition is basically college graduates, and 64% of the voting public is not a college graduate. So you just start with simple math. We can get 100% of college grads and still lose every goddamn election, right? So you have to basically acknowledge, I think, the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. So that's a starting point. The other really important point, I think, for Democrats to think about is what happened to the working class vote that used to be reliably Democratic. 2 out of every 3 working class voters used to vote for the Democratic Party, and now 2 out of 3 of them are, or a majority of them, 2 out of 3 in some demos are voting for the Republicans. That's a really big problem for the Democratic Party. We used to be a party that was all about giving people an economic foundation so that they could put a roof over their head and send their kids to college if they wanted to, take their kids on vacation, maybe get a house at the lake. We're not that party anymore, or at least that's not the perception of what the Democratic Party is now. The perception that we have to kind of live with is you're a party that's left the middle class behind, and you have other constituencies that you care about more. Now, I don't think anybody would say the Democratic Party doesn't care at all about the working class, but I think there are a lot of working class voters who would say they don't care that much about me. They lecture me. They look down on me, and I'm kind of tired of it. And that's a really big problem. As a guy who came into politics through Ted Kennedy's office, who was, he was a progressive, but he was fundamentally a fighter to lift people up economically, people of every color, of every gender, every persuasion. He just wanted people to have a chance to, pursue and achieve the American dream. And that's why I think, listen to Bernie Sanders, don't do dumb shit. It's kind of the same as yesterday, right?
I'll add to that too, which is, a little while ago, when Barack Obama was announcing his cabinet, I noted the share of these cabinet appointees that came from Ivy League colleges, which was something like 2/3, Okay, so whether or not the Democrats' values have shifted against the working class, certainly the ecosystem in which Democratic leaders emerge is elite and much more elite than the Republican Party. And so that means that at least at best, Democrats have a hard time talking to people without those elites backgrounds because they're all living in their own ecosystem.
I would just say real quick to put a fine point on that. The 15 wealthiest House districts are represented by Democrats. Of the next 75, they represent 65 of those districts. And, you know, I would structure that you have kind of a similar like late 80s Republican Party emerging out of the Democratic Party, which is a really single issue focus group that is really driving the politics in the party. And then, you know, they're kind of stuck that, you know, we got a big tax fight coming, and all the Democrats, especially in the Northeast, are talking about SALT deductions, which is not for the working class. Michael would argue differently, but it's not, at least on the bumper sticker. And, you know, you just see, with Obamacare, we're going to ship $22 trillion to health insurance companies the next 10 years. Look at the Fortune 50 in America. How many insurance companies are on that list? I mean, this is the problem that the structural problems I think that the Democratic Party faces is that it's hard to be the working class party when you can't cut capital gains because your wealthiest districts, the people who fund your campaigns at the small donor or large donor level, do not want capital gains cut or raised. And so it's hard to pay for some of these priorities for the working class when you can't do it. And then also, I think the cultural wars have kind of, I think we won't get into that, but it's just it's been I think this election kind of I think has the Democratic Party recalibrating, and we've been through this before. Republicans have the same fight. It's like we're more like Thunderdome than you seem more orderly than we are, but it's like we weren't conservative enough. We were too crazy, you know. And it's like you know
More crazies.
And you can see the big change I think in the Republican Party the last 20 years has been a move to populism. So we've lost our share of college-educated elites, and we've added. There's more Republicans in the House represent more people on food stamps than the Democratic Party, and it's not just because we're in the majority. I mean, I'm just saying.
Which is an interesting problem with, you know, deficit reduction and entitlements, because it's now the Republican constituents that are on welfare and that need Medicaid and that benefit from Social Security the most, right? So there's definitely a shift going on, and it's, you know.
Well, I was going to say, you know, for my Republican friends, be careful what you wish for, because we champion ourselves as, you know, the working man and woman or the working class. Well, we just heard what the working class is on, but these are programs we want to cut. So how are you going to do that? I had a conversation with a member of Congress from Mississippi, a little bit of a public fight, because he was going on and on about the welfare state. And the problem was he was inferring racially that the problem was African Americans. And I pointed out to him and said, the majority of the people on welfare in your district are white. In fact, the majority of people in your district who are not on welfare are Black. And so there are dynamics to this that are going to get played out as well as this party, this new populist Republican Party, embraces this working class ethos. But how are you going to deal with the problems that the working class are actually living under? And what are your policy prescriptions for Obamacare? Is it just to strip it out when for 4 years you couldn't come up with a plan of repeal and replace? I sat in the rooms for 2 years with that argument. And I watched that argument go south because no one had an answer. And to this date, there still is no answer other than we're going to just strip it out. Okay, what are you going to do? So the politics here is sweet when you just want to talk the politics, but that's over now. The governing kicks in and the policy making kicks in. And so all of this embrace of the working class is great on a bumper sticker, but the reality of it is there are a lot of poor people who want to move to the middle class. There are a lot of working people who want to move to the middle class. That was Jack Kemp, Republicanism, my mentor and friend. And we don't talk that anymore. So that's going to, for me, it's going to be an interesting play in this Trumpian space, how you translate that into public policy for working men and women who have an expectation to move into the middle class.
Thank you all very much.